So we will introduce you in Spanish and English because we have to have experience and stuff to so. Buenas tardes a todos. Esto creo que no va. Buenas tardes a todos. Hoy tenemos con nosotros a don Alessandro Talevi, músico y uno de los directores de ópera más reconocidos actualmente. Don Alessandro nació en Johannesburgo, Sudáfrica. Estudió música y historia del arte en la Universidad de Witwatersrand y piano en la Real Academia de Música de Londres. Actualmente vive en Turín. Ha dirigido en grandes teatros tales como la Ópera de Roma, Teatro Real en Madrid, Israelí Ópera en Tel Aviv o Central City Ópera en Colorado. En la próxima semana, don Alessandro dirigirá el Teatro de la Maestranza.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have with us Mr. Alessandro Talevi, a musician and one of the most renowned opera conductors of the century. Mr. Alessandro was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. He studied music and art history at the University of Witwatersrand and piano at the Royal Academy of Music in London. Currently living in Turin, he has conducted in major theatres such as the Opera di Roma, Teatro Real Madrid, Israeli Opera, Tel Aviv, or Central City Opera, Colorado. Next week, Don Alessandro will conduct at the Teatro de la Maestranza here in Spain. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I feel like a very honored guest to be here. So it's an interesting thing. I was introduced as a conductor, but I'm fine standing. No problem. But I think it's where in Spanish you say when I think like dirección is something else. I think that means conducting. Yeah. So actually, in English, a director is someone who does the stage, so all the stage pictures. So it's actually a slightly different job description, although I work together with the conductor who controls the orchestra and the music, okay? And together, the conductor and the director, who is me, we put together the productions that you see on stage, that you see and that you hear. So I gather many of you are play instruments, huh? Who are the musicians here? Just put up your hands. I'm just interested to see. Okay, musicians. Okay, very good. And then I hear that some of you also are arts students, that you do visual arts. Do you want to put up your hands who does visual arts? Great. Well, so you're a mixture of both of the disciplines that constitute opera, because opera is maybe the only art form, only classical art form where all the disciplines, all the different art forms come together in one art form, and that's what makes it so unique and so special. I actually started when I was about 11 or 12. I wanted to be a set designer, so I was more interested in the visual, the scenography, the stage design. I wanted to create stage design. I didn't know what a director was. I had no idea what being a director was. And then when I was at school, I was lucky enough to have a very good music teacher who suddenly made me interested in music. And then I decided I didn't want to do stage design anymore. I wanted to become a professional pianist. And actually, then I studied piano to a very quite a high level. But I always had this feeling in the back of my head that somehow just being a musician was not everything that I wanted to be. That I could feel that was part of me was saying, don't neglect the visual, don't neglect the art. But I still didn't know what a director was. And when I went to so I lived in South Africa during the years of apartheid. I don't know whether you guys know what apartheid is. So it was in the old days in South Africa. We were separate. White children had to go to one school and black children had to go to another school. White people had to use one beach, for example, and black people had to go on another beach. White people could use one bus, and black people had to use another bus. It was just a crazy system. And so that was my background. And when I started going to university, that was the end of apartheid. So everything, just the old system collapsed, thank goodness, and everyone started mixing properly for the first time. It was a very unusual situation to be in. But straight after university in South Africa, I went to do to conservatoire in London. I studied because I'm half English and half Italian, but I grew up in South Africa. And so I went to England because London was like my mother's city, and I studied piano at the Royal Academy of Music, which is one of the conservatoires in London. And the Royal Academy of Music is a very important school of music in London. And I went there to study accompaniment for singers. Are there any pianists here? Anyone play piano? Right? Oh, lots. Okay. And as a soloist, you play on your own, but as an accompanist, you can accompany violinists, instrumentalists, or singers. And I liked accompanying singers because I liked it. It was you're working with singers that they're expressing poetry through music, and so I liked working with the words and all that sort of thing. And that was what I went to London to study. And when I was in London at the Royal Academy of Music, I offered to play for the opera classes. Now, I didn't know anything about opera until that point. I didn't know what a director did. And so as a pianist for the opera class, you have to play what the orchestra usually plays. So, what you guys are going to see, the ones who come to see the production on Sunday, you will see the orchestra playing. But before that, in order to prepare the singers for the drama side, they have a pianist in the rehearsals, and the pianist has to play the music like a jukebox again and again and again until the singers get the moods right. Because what the director does is he'll say, right, I want you to come in from this side. I want you to start crying at this point. At this point, I want this character, I want you to kiss that other character, or I want you to fight, or I want you to hit that. But so it's basically what the director does is he controls the action on the stage. And I've never seen this before. And I was playing. I was the jukebox. I was playing for the opera rehearsal. And I watched what this director was doing. I thought, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. Because for me, it suddenly seemed like the way to combine all of my interests, because the director also has to choose, and we'll go through some things in a moment. The director also has to choose. So we get given the opera to do. We have to choose the setting, how we want it the production to look, how each scene must look. Like if there's a concept behind it, there's you can if you think that the story of the opera has a special message, or the essence is, the essence of the story needs to come out. That's the director's job to make it come out. So if he thinks that the story would be best if it was set on the moon, for example, he will say to the designer, he'll say, I want you to create like a moonscape, and I want the lighting to be very atmospheric. And so my job is I ask set designer, I say to the set designer, right, this is my vision for the scene. Can you please create the sets? And then I have a costume designer, and the costume designer makes the costumes. I tell the costume designer what I want them to create. And then there's a lighting designer as well, and light is extremely important with stage work. And so the director basically has to control all these things, and then also teach the singers how to act, how he wants them to act. And so we put all of that together. And when I was watching this director at the Royal Academy of Music, I realized that was what I wanted to do. And somehow it would bring me back to my first interest, which was visual arts. So I'll show you. You guys have put together some images of my productions, I believe. So yes, so That was actually an opera that I did in America, Eugene Onegin. I don't know if any of you have read the story by Pushkin, but it's a very tragic story about a young girl who falls in love with an older man, and was a little bit older, not that much older, and he's very cynical and breaks her heart. And then years later, when she's grown up and she becomes this very famous princess in society, he meets her again and he falls in love with her, but then it's of course her turn to break his heart. So it's like it's a very tragic story. But there's the scene in the third act which is like a ballroom scene, and this is just to show you like what the choices they come down to the director, because sometimes the director will say, well, let's just do like the classic ballroom scene with people dancing, just wearing normal clothes. And for me, it was like, well, this party, this ball is like a nightmare. We're seeing a nightmare through the eyes of the man who's now in love with a girl, because he sees all these people dancing around him and he hates everything that he sees except for her. So I tried to turn all the dancers almost like into these strange, crazy monsters. And it's given like a monstrous sort of look. So there's all the skulls, and it comes a little bit from, I think, do you call it the Dia de las Muertes, so the Day of the Dead, which is actually also a strong tradition in Mexico as well. And I said to the costume designer, I want you to think a little bit about trying to use those influences, because that will make it very nightmarish, you know. So that was one. Should we look at any more? So this was a production of The Turn of the Screw, which is another psychological, very incredible psychological story. It's about this governess who goes, you know what a governess is? A governess is someone who, in the old days, she was hired to look after children at home. Okay, so she would take care of these children, and this governess gets asked to go to this remote country house and look after these two children who live in this house. And when she first arrives, she thinks everything is beautiful and the house is wonderful and everything's normal. But slowly she becomes she realizes that these children might be haunted by ghosts, by the dead governess before her, and the man the dead keeper of the whole estate. But we are never totally sure whether it's in her imagination or the ghosts are real. And that was the whole challenge of this show, was to try and suggest that maybe the ghosts are real and maybe they're not real. And the reason why so that's one of the ghosts. Okay, so he's actually a tenor. He was singing in the scene, and that's one of the children who she thinks is being possessed. And in this scene, I actually had the governess in the room sleeping on her bed, and it made it look like maybe she was just reading it instead of the ghost being real. Yes.
I saw the movie some time ago, so like I'm not sure, but I think when I saw the movie, the boy was crazy.
Oh yes. Oh really? Okay. So it was of this story. Yes, The Turn of the Screw. Yes. So that's always the essence of a good horror story, is that you're never totally sure if the ghost is real or not. I think that's what makes it, or if the person is crazy, you know, whether the governess is crazy or the children are crazy. Okay.
Sometimes that you see the ghosts or monsters and stuff, but you never know for sure because they never actually say they're real or if they're
Exactly, and that's what makes the story interesting right until the end, because when you read those books like a horror story, you know, you turn the pages because you want to find out like what the mystery is. And the best stories, I think, you might agree with me or you might disagree with me, are the ones that keep the mystery until the end, and they leave you thinking and questioning, was that real or not? And the wonderful thing about theatre is that you can create these worlds of, you can create almost like dreamlike spaces. So with lighting and with costume and with effect, it becomes like, do you guys ever go to like Those, you know, those museums where you walk into a room and it's like a big installation. It's like an installation and you can almost go around and touch the set. That's a little bit like what we do with opera, you know, with the stage. Are there any more pictures? Oh yes, so that's quite a comic one.
Is someone controlling this?
Sorry?
Is someone controlling this? You always have the perfect time.
Oh, I don't know. Or maybe it's just, it could just be live on my website because I have a slideshow. Oh, you're controlling it. Oh, okay, fine. Okay. I don't know. I was like, well, actually, on my website, I do have a slideshow. And that's the magic flute. That's the magic flute, actually. And here again, like usually Prince Tamino, Prince is, you know, he's the prince and he gets commanded by the Queen of the Night to go and look for her daughter who's been abducted by this sorcerer, Sarastro. And what's amazing about the story is that at the beginning you think the Queen is good and that Sarastro is bad, but the prince learns along the way, but through these various adventures, that actually the Queen is evil and that Sarastro is actually a good magician who has taken her daughter away in order to protect her from the mother. And that's something that the story becomes apparent after, you know, as you go through it. And in this production, I said it almost like in colonial times. So you see, again, this is like, the choice of, the director has to choose how to set it, because Prince Tamino, it could be totally just like magic, or it could be something more realistic. And so I chose like a sort of colonial setting. You know, these are like the old colonial hats. And then these are the ladies here are fighting over him because they find him asleep and they think he's very handsome. And then they're all meant to go back to the Queen and say, he's here, but there's three of them, and it's quite a comic opera. And the one lady says, "No, you go," and then the other goes, "No, you go, no, you go," and then they end up fighting over him. So it's quite a funny scene. Good. Anything? Should we go to the next one? Oh yes. So that's quite a sort of a violent one. We might move on from that one. Shall we? Are there any more on the? This, I think that you know which one I really wanted to show you was, and I think it's very relevant. You know the very can we go back up to the top? Is it way to go up to the top? Yeah. So go back. Yeah. Exactly. Now this one. Yeah, that one. Now I wonder if you can. Is it possible to scroll down? Is it possible? No, you can't really. You only got one image, huh? You only got the one. Okay, that's fine. It's not a problem. So this opera is called Alcina, and it's a magic opera. And the story, it's by a composer called Handel. I don't know whether any of you have played any of Handel's music. George Frederick Handel, you might have done. There's a lot of famous tunes that. He wrote this piece called Alcina, which is basically about this sorceress, another story of the supposedly evil sorceress who turns men into, basically she lures men, because she's very beautiful, she lures men to her island, and then she turns them into rocks or animals or trees or plants. So she turns it so it's like an enchanted island. And one of these men's wife or lover goes to the island to try and rescue her lover, who is being turned into we don't know, a stone or a rotting animal. And eventually they succeed in destroying the spell and destroying the island, and then all the plants, animals, rocks turn back into men at the end of the opera. So it's a lot of fun to do as a stage director. But I chose something, for me, you know, so it looked, I've said it almost like in futuristic. It looks like a sort of futuristic era. Because I realized that actually there's so many human beings in the world. How many are there of us now? How many people in the world? 7.9. Seriously, 7.9. Okay, so I remember when I was your age, there were 6 billion people. That's 1.9 billion more people in, I don't know how many years, lots of years. Well, not that many years, but you know what I mean. There's 1.9 is a lot of people, 1.9 billion. And then I suddenly thought, well, actually, maybe the sorceress who turns people into trees is actually quite a good sorceress. Like, why should she be presented as a bad sorceress? So I made the whole island, a bit like so the Magic Island was like became like a biosphere. I don't know if you guys know what a biosphere is. It's those special kind of massive greenhouses, where and they have different ecosystems. So I don't know whether there is one here in Spain, but in the UK there's one where there's like a jungle and there's like a desert, and you can find all the plants of every country in the world in this biosphere. And so I created it like it was almost like a futuristic biosphere, and the sorceress was trying to preserve nature instead of having it overrun by humanity. So I turned the whole thing around and made her the good like a good sorceress, and the people who were trying to destroy her like into the evil ones. So and here you can see like it had some. In fact, these were young. They weren't mature singers. They were actually dancers who were only about. Some of them were 14 or 15. In fact, I think that the girls in this photo are actually about 15, and it was a dance group who collaborated with me, and they were like the keepers of the island, and they helped nurture all the plants. And we even had a waterfall on stage, like a proper waterfall with running water and lights and everything. So it was a lot of fun to do. So anyway, so that just gives you a basic idea of what what I do. I create the sort of the worlds that you see on stage. Yes.
So your job's kind of like taking like a book, a script, or like music,
yes.
or a musical piece, and like
yes.
translating it into an opera. Right?
Well, so basically with opera is already written. So basically, yeah. So it's basically opera is like the script with the music, and it's all already been written. So it's my job is to, because as it stands, it's just like a script basically. It's just a book with music, and I've got to bring it to life on stage. So that's basically what an opera production is. You're taking something that just sits on the page. It's like a dead thing on the page, and you're turning it into something. You're turning it into a live performance. Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, in the script itself, did it specify that they want to turn things around, like make the woman that's meant that's actually they want to make her the good guy, the good woman, and the others the
yes,
bad?
It's a very, very good question. Well, the thing is, these days, directors are given quite a lot of freedom to interpret the story, because the way, and I'll come to you guys in a minute, the way, because most people who come to see the opera, and you'll be like that too, eventually, you'll learn, you get to know the stories, okay? And so what sometimes people and audiences are looking for is something like a slightly new interpretation. So they sometimes look to the director to kind of, to maybe twist the story a little bit in order for them, the audience to say, oh, I never thought about that like that before, It's part of our job to try and find new ways of looking at things. You know what I mean? Yes.
So I was an actor and
yes.
a props master for my local theater in
yes.
America. Did you have any local theaters growing up?
Well, it's a very interesting thing you say. So in South Africa, was quite, it's kind of far away from like Europe and America. So in a sense, we were quite isolated. I did work with when I was working at school. I did actually do the production. I helped design the sets, and I like doing props as well, because I think props, sets, it's all kind of part of the same thing. So I did actually work. I did do productions when I was growing up. Yeah, I did do productions, and I also acted, but I was a very bad actor. Yes. A favorite show? Yes, I do actually. So I think my favorite show overall was that Eugene Onegin, which is the one you saw with kind of the monstery people with big dresses on. Yeah, there we go. It was that one. Yeah, because it somehow, you know what? It was just after the pandemic, and actually those guys they are not singers, they are dancers. And I was told that I couldn't have the chorus on stage because in an opera we have the principals, like the main actors, and then there's always like a big chorus. And I was told I couldn't have a chorus on stage. And so I had to come up with a creative solution to try and have the idea that there were people on stage, but they couldn't sing, because singing like creates droplets. That was the whole thing. I know, like, it's very boring. It's very boring stuff to know about, but it ought to be reminded of, shall we say? But it made me kind of come up with an idea, almost like a dreamlike production, where so with fewer people on stage, and they weren't singing around her, but it was almost like we were seeing the world through the eyes of the young girl who was in love with this older guy, and it actually it looked really amazing in the end. And it was at this festival called Santa Fe Opera, which is Santa Fe Opera is in New Mexico. I don't know if you ever went to New Mexico, but you probably have been to New Mexico. Okay. But it's an amazing opera house, which is like half indoors and half outdoors. And at the back of the theater, instead of like just being a box, it was open to the desert at the back. So you could see through all the way, and somehow you had to incorporate your set into the natural landscape. And that was like a really fun challenge. So I think that was maybe one highlight. Yes, sorry, the microphone, yeah.
Are you planning on doing another opera now?
Right now, I'm working at the Teatro della Maestranza.
What is the main idea of the opera you're trying to
do now? So this one, are you going to come and see it? Or are you coming to it? Okay, good. Okay, so basically, it's a story about Queen Elizabeth I of England. Okay, so Queen Elizabeth I of England, when she was at the end of her reign, she was like a rather tragic figure. She was extremely old, but she was still very, very much in love with this younger guy. And basically, the opera is about this like relationship that wasn't really meant to be, because she was about 40 years older than him. Okay, and she gets betrayed by him, and then the final scene is it's like a mad scene. Basically, she loses it, and she condemns about 5 people to death during one aria, and then we see this the end of the opera is like her mad scene, and we see in my production, which is also not like totally realistic. It's almost like I've tried to make the stage set like the inside of her mind. So when she sings about like all these kind of corpses and ghosts in her, that are populating the whole of England, you see all these kind of heads on spikes and things at the back of the set. It's quite dramatic. So I'm glad you're coming to see it. Yeah, so I'm just going to give one more to this, okay, and then I'll come to you. Okay. Yeah.
Two questions.
Yes.
The first one. What has been your most difficult stage design? Like the stage that you have designed that was more of a challenge. And the second question is, what was the first project? What was the first stage design?
Okay, both good questions. So the first one, I think you actually had an image of, the one of the 2 giant eyes. There was one with like a dark face with giant eyes. So that was probably the theatre that was the most difficult for me. I think it's before, yeah, that one. Now, can you see, those are people sitting on chairs. Can you see that? Those are actual people sitting on chairs. The theatre was huge. The stage is 100 meters across, and it's about 40 meters high. And I had a chorus of 60 people, which sounds like a lot of people, but in that space, it's not huge. And so it's 100 meters across. And honestly, when I was trying to direct people, saying, right, you come in from that side, and you come in from that side, and meet in the middle, I felt like I was like underwater. Like that's how it's much easier to communicate with people in a room like you guys are in. That's like a normal size of a stage. So that was maybe the biggest challenge. So I used projections on the back wall of the theatre to kind of emphasize the space. Okay. So that was like maybe the biggest show I ever did. And then the smallest show I ever did was my first show. And so my very first show, because this is probably something that you guys will encounter in your lives as artistic people, is that when you train to do something, you go to university or you go to school and you perfect one skill. And if you want to, it doesn't mean necessarily that you are going to stay doing that thing for the rest of your lives. You might want have a new something else in your mind, and don't let it inhibit you. What the fact that you've already studied one thing. Don't think that that is your only thing that you can do in your life. You could do many things. Like I thought at one point, I thought I was just going to be a musician. When I finished studying at the Royal Academy of Music, and I told people I wanted to be a director, they didn't take me seriously. They were like, you just studied music. Like, how are you going to suddenly become a director? Are you going to study being a director? And I was like, well, no, I guess I can't. I finished studying. So I just started doing it myself. And actually, the directing is very practical. So it's about, telling a story. And, most people can direct. Anyone who's got a bit of an instinct about stage or telling a story can direct. It's, my grandmother could direct. I mean, okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. But, so what I did was actually, I put on a production. I was working as a piano teacher in a school. And just to earn some money to pay the rent and everything. And I sold, and they had a lovely theatre. And the guy, the headmistress, the headmaster of the school said, well, why don't you use our theatre to start doing your own productions? And so I sold my piano for about £500, £400, and I did my first opera production. And so basically, I found a singer friend from from the Royal Academy of Music. And it was an opera for one person. There's an opera by Poulenc called La Voix Humaine, The Human Voice. And it's basically about a woman on the telephone breaking up with her boyfriend, basically. It's quite tragic. It's only half an hour long. But if you think about it, it was quite a cheap way of doing my first production. Half an hour, one singer. With the rest of the money, I built the sets and I did all the lighting myself. And obviously, it was like a learning experience. So that was the first one. And it was kind of the smallest one as well. And then, that kind of leads to other things. But the important thing is just to persevere, When you're working in the arts, it's a bit like being like, you're all like a bunch of monkeys on a branch, and someone's shaking the branch, and you just got to keep holding on, That's the sort of feeling of being an artist. I'm just going to share, before we get to you, I'd just like to answer your question quickly, because you're here.
So you said that your dad was from Italy, right?
Italy, yes.
And your mother was from London?
Yes.
Yes, so how did you become
in South Africa?
Yeah.
Yes, well, so my father went with his parents when he was quite young. It was like the 1950s, I think, 1960s, when South Africa was like a place to go, a bit like Australia or America. People would leave. They left Europe after the war because Europe was sort of, very poor at that time, so people went to South Africa for opportunities. And then my mother, my dad lived in South Africa from quite a young age, and my mother went just as a tourist, and she met my father. So that was how they met, and that's why I'm South African, because I grew up in South Africa. Yeah.
Second question. So if you had to choose another profession,
yes.
Then what would you study?
Oh, okay. Well, could it be any of the things that led me to becoming a director? Would that count? Stage design or music or
something like that? Yes.
Okay, yeah. Well, then I think that's probably what I'd do. I'd be a stage designer. And if that failed, I would play the piano. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. What? Just. Yeah.
What do you think, we're gonna direct the opera?
Yeah.
How do you know, people are gonna understand when you're trying to,
Yes.
for example,
Yeah.
with the ball,
Yes.
dancing?
Yes.
You said it was the eyes of the man seeing
yes.
everything as a nightmare. How do you know that people are gonna understand that?
Good point. I mean, so basically what I did was I always had him in the scene, okay, and he was looking around, and then things would almost visualized in front of him. So the audience sees as that guy was looking around the room, they saw what he was looking at, and it would sort of animate in a certain way, and they were dancing in quite a crazy style. So it was and then he the way I directed was he kind of shrunk away from everything, and was hiding in a corner by the end, And then obviously it connects with the words that he sings straight afterwards, and he says, "I feel like everything around me is complete, like a complete nightmare." So it kind of made sense, you know what I mean? I just took it a step further than naturalistic. Yeah.
Alright, so I have 2 questions.
Yes.
What exactly goes into creating this? Right, so I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
So the first one is, what goes into creating a set? Like, how do you do it?
Yeah.
What goes on here?
Okay, so I know what the opera is, all right, and I know I've been told what the opera is, and I know that I've got to create a scene that has a sort of certain idea, like I want to express a certain idea. Okay, you have to be very aware, like, of the space, like what the space that you've got at your disposal. So if the theatre is a certain dimension, you think, well, how can I kind of translate this idea in the best way into the space that I've got? And the way I normally start, because I also design my own sets as well sometimes, is I just kind of I create a mock-up of the set, like a small one, like like a 1 by 25. You know a scale, so it's like 1 to 25, 1 to 50. 1 to 50 is really small, and then I just create a mock-up, and then I sort of play around with ideas. I just kind of cut out pieces of paper, and I sort of play with the shapes of them like that. I think, okay, that's the right shape. And if I'm working like that with a designer who's going to be carrying out what I want to do, we do the same thing. We basically, because there's 2 things. The idea has to work, but then the set also has to be useful for the actors who are within it. You can't just have a sculptural idea that then no one knows what to do with. You have to. The set has to have meaning and also have function. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Were any of your productions unsuccessful?
Yes. I've been booed on stage before. So I think obviously we try in our best way possible to create something, but you never know, before you start with something, you never know exactly how it's going to turn out. And it's something that you learn with experience as well. Sometimes you go into a company and you have these ideas, but you need to also work out, that's one of the things that comes with experience. Can the company, can the people who are building the sets and the costumes, can they give you what you want? Have they got the resources to give you what you want? Or are you being wildly over-optimistic? In which case, with a bit of experience sometimes, or just also a bit of intuition, you kind of adapt. Sometimes it's just because my ideas have been a little bit too outrageous, or they haven't, or I think that they're really daring, but then they haven't really worked with the music or the text, and so there's this sort of feeling that somehow it doesn't quite work, But I think that it's worth taking the risk, because when it does work, it's great. It's great to be able to do something a little bit unconventional and a bit daring, and just challenge people's way of thinking. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. You're on.
Who or what is your biggest inspiration towards creating these opera? For example, how can you think of your perspective? How can you think of twisting the story around? How can you think of that?
Yes. Obviously, one of the things about being a director, or any artist really, is that you need to be really open with your eyes and your ears to what's going around you in society and the world, and also just art. It's very important to go to art galleries, to go to watch the news, and see what other artists are doing. I'm very inspired also by fashion, like high fashion, what fashion designers can do, because not just the clothes that they design, but I don't know if you guys have ever seen the spectacle that they make of fashion shows. When you look at the opening of a collection in Paris or whatever, it's the whole thing. It's designed to have maximum impact, and there's some very, very creative people working in other disciplines like fashion, in television. I like watching music videos as well. Music videos are great for getting ideas about how people use sets and lighting, and also this movement. So I wouldn't say that there's any one particular influence that I particularly like, but I get passionate about one person's work or another person's work, and that person could be a fashion designer. He could be a musician. It could be a band that has those rock, those concerts, and looking at what they do on the live stage. that's the sort of thing that I think it's important to draw from lots of different influences. Yeah. I'll do that later. Okay. And then I come to you. Sorry, guys. I know you've been waiting. Okay. One, two. Okay, I'll do it.
Which one was your most emotional one to direct?
I think it's that's an interesting question. I think it's when the story intersects a little bit with what's going on in your own life, that can have a lot of emotional impact. So especially like when there's a character in the story that you identify with, how that can often get you going. There was once I did an opera by Mozart called Idomeneo, and that's about a father-son relationship, and I just lost my dad. He like passed away a few months before, so that was and the whole opera is about the father-son relationship. So I guess that was a particularly emotional one for me to do. I like doing ones that really make me emotional. Now we're going to go to these guys over here for a second. You guys got the mic? You want to use it? Okay, just shout. Yeah.
Don't you feel nervous about, for example, that your opera doesn't go well when they're
Yes. So the question was, do I ever feel nervous when the opera doesn't go well? Well, of course, that's like, yeah. No, I mean, I'm not, but it's true. I do feel nervous. I especially feel nervous, especially, I feel more nervous when I know it's a good show, but I'm worried about the actual performance, because the performance is different every night. If you think about it, like theater, it's like opera is theater, it's a live performance. So it's not like creating a film where you can then go and edit afterwards, and you can do post-production, and you can keep sort of perfecting it. Opera is a live performance, so and there's always a little bit of human error involved in any performance. So but just before the show opens, I'm a bag of nerves. So I'm thinking, are the technicians going to remember to fly that piece of scenery out? That means like, are they going to take out? Are the singers going to remember to come in time? Are they going to remember that thing I told them? And so it does make me like quite nervous beforehand. It really does. And then obviously once the performance is over, I'm really, really happy, because usually things are fine. But I have been in situations where there's been total disasters on stage in the middle of the show, and I'm just looking and thinking, what do we do? And usually in those cases, it's about the team of stage managers who look after who have to make the quick thinking decisions. Like there was one particular opera I did. I was just telling the story where it was a story about Anne Boleyn. Have you heard of Anne Boleyn? She was the wife of Henry, one of the wives of Henry VIII. And in this opera by Donizetti, which is the same composer as the one you guys are going to see, she dreams about being a young girl again. And on the stage, I had this big revolve. The revolve is like a turning stage. And as she was coming, and on the stage, on the revolve, there was this like a crib, like a baby, like a child's bed. And it came all the way down stage on this revolve, and it was meant to stop just behind her, so that she could climb into it at the end of her aria and do the rest of the opera in this thing, as if she went to become a child again. She'd like gone from being a grown woman down to being a child. And the guy who was meant to be turning the buttons on the revolve forgot to turn the thing off. So she sang her aria, and like the crib was like going past like that, and it went like past her, and I was like, who's operating the buttons? And the thing is, it turned out that the guy who should have turned off the buttons was also doing off-stage band, so he was worrying about the music, so he'd forgotten to do both things. And the singer, she turned around and she saw that her crib had like gone like way past her, and she ran after it, she grabbed it, and she pulled it back, and as she pulled it back, it got stuck in the revolve, and one of the legs broke off and just splintered, and then the whole thing was just like a heap of wood on the floor. And then she had to just spend the rest of the opera standing up. But you know what was so weird? It was so funny. It's like most of the audience didn't know that, and they were like, afterwards, some people said, I just love the way you like destroyed her crib, because it's like the destruction of like childhood fantasy. So they thought it was actually like it was meant to happen. So you just have to kind of go with it, At the end of the day, it's theatre. It's not like we're living in. It's a fabulous world to be in, but it's like It's like it's a fantasy world. It's a kind space to be in. It's not like we are brain surgeons and we're saving people's lives. We're trying to make people's lives better through art, which is fortunately not such a dangerous or pressured sort of job. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's go ahead. Yeah.
Do you still make more instruments, or do you only play one?
More instruments. I did sing. Does that count? Very badly. I've got sort of a bass voice that is not very good. I did play, oh, well, actually, it's a good point. I played the recorder when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I was so bad at it that I used to just fake it. I used to pretend that I was playing, because, you know, in the recorder choirs, when there's like 20 people playing the recorder, I would just say, well, I just like pretend, you know. And then one day the teacher went, Alessandro, you play on your own. And I was like, oh. And then I was asked to leave the recorded choir, and that's it. My parents thought I wasn't musical. But it just goes to show, sometimes it's about finding the right instrument for you. So when I found the piano, I loved playing the piano, but and then I realized that was my path, you see. But I think if I had just stayed with the idea that I could play a recorder, I probably would have accepted the fact that I was unmusical, which wasn't the case. I just didn't like the recorder. Yes.
Is there anyone you wish to collaborate with?
Oh, well, I collaborate with people all the time from different disciplines. I even had break dancers in my show once. So I had a group of break dancers who did a thing. So I collaborate with different talents. So when a company asks me to do a particular opera, I think like who would be the best people to be in my team. So obviously the singers are the singers, but like I can choose like a choreographer, I can choose the designer. Sometimes I use the designer that came from, she was a designer for Gucci. So she also she was a Gucci designer. So she brought like kind of a fashion aesthetic, you know. So I like to collaborate with people to come from different different artistic disciplines outside of my own. Yeah? Who's next? Okay, great. Shall I take these three and then maybe we call it a little, or four, and then maybe call it a little. So you have you, yes, you have. I'll just go. Okay, go first. So maybe just 4 questions. All right? Yeah. Hard to do. Yes, the question was, have any show that I've been interested in that I've been especially proud of because it's hard to do? Yes, I would say yes. The operas, there's some operas that are very difficult to make believable because their stories feel very outdated for us. And the one that I struggle with is La Traviata, which is basically about a courtesan. A courtesan is sort of like a woman who would, like 200 years ago, these women were sort of paid to sort of stay with men, but it's not what you think it is. It's kind of like, it was like they were more artistically, anyway, it's very difficult to get that across. And usually people who do those operas, the singers are very, very highly praised, and the directors are always criticized because they can't bring the story to life. And there was once I did a production in Israel, and that opera was a success. And so I was very pleased I was able to make the story work for a modern audience, if you know what I mean. I'll just say the question afterwards.
You said before that you gave the magic flute.
Yes.
How did it's quite famous, and I
yes.
How did you make it different?
So the magic flute. Hold on. The magic flute is basically about the idea of like it's about, I think I've told you, it's about like things that seem to be as they were at the beginning are not what they are. You realize later that for example, the good queen turns out to be evil, and the bad soldier turns out to be good. And in a sense, it's like a process that every human being goes through as they grow up. You know, as they have to face all these trials and tribulations. So in the story, the prince has to like kill the dragon, and then he's got to go through like the trials of fire and the trials of water. And that, in a sense, is like a metaphor for every human being's journey through life. And in my production, I don't know whether you guys know the magic flute, but there's 3 boys who accompany the hero the whole way through the opera. And so I made the 3 boys like it was like their story, and they were in a nursery. We were in their nursery at the start of the opera. And so they had like a toy theater, and they were telling the story of Tamina through the whole story. And then right at the end of the opera, we saw the three boys coming back into their nursery, and they were grown men. They were like in their early 20s, and their nursery was under sheets, and they were like remembering it. So it was like that was kind of how I got that idea of the measure blues. Yes, I have 2 minutes more. Yeah.
So aside from opera pieces, would you think about directing a musical, like for say Six or Little Shop of Horrors, something like that?
Yes, it's a good point. I think I could do a musical. I would love to do a musical because especially musicals are like big and they're fun and they also you get paid a lot, a bit more than opera probably. But I guess because you develop a name in a certain field and then you just get asked by people because I think that's what you can do well. It's quite difficult to break out of that and just get the opportunity to do that. I think what I'm going to do is like I sold my piano at the beginning of my career, I'm going to have to sell my house now to fund my own musical. But anyway, I'm hoping that someone will give me a musical at some point. Okay, just need to do
that. So you've obviously been surrounded by different cultures and nationalities. So how do you think that has affected your personality and maybe the way you make these performances? And also my question, if you don't mind, is also, are you looking forward to this evening's album?
Yes, it's a good point. I mean, coming from growing up in Africa, I think, but having an Italian background, which is in a sense quite similar to Spain in some ways, it's quite similar to Spanish. Having an English mother, that's very, very different. So I think that my particular combination of cultures has maybe helped me to, especially working internationally, understand intuitively like how different people communicate, and finding ways to sort of be open-minded about how people might try and communicate with you and not be sort of closed off. So I think being international helps. I think that's what obviously you guys are getting is like a good international perspective which will stand you good stuff. And of course I'm very much looking forward to this weekend and I hope to see you all and meet you maybe after the show and then you can tell me what you think. Yes, yeah. Two more and then we're done. Yeah, okay.
Have you ever had anything like happen last minute and it was a scramble to get it done? Like for example, it was the dress rehearsal right before the play, our first time doing this play in my theater, and we had this stage that came out of the ground like this, and it just self-destructed during this dress rehearsal, and my director comes up to me, he's like, Milo, you better fix the stage. And I'm like, why is it my job? And then the next day, I was underneath the stage as they were about to start putting gears in.
Yes. And were you able to fix it?
Eventually, yes.
Wow, stressful. Yes, I mean, I'm just trying to think of I've got several like surreal stories to tell. I just wish I could all think of them all right now. But it happens, especially like unforeseen things happen, and then you just have to think on the spot. And sometimes it's best not to get bitter and say, well, why did this have to happen to me? I get all the bad luck, and then just like be negative. Sometimes the thing you got to do is think on the spot and say, okay, this has happened. Let's just find our way around it. Let's find a creative solution to get over it. And sometimes it's that aspect of change which forces you to be even more creative, and then you end up with a result that's even stronger than you'd imagined, because you were prepared to take the risk and go with the change, But I'm glad you managed to get your stage to sorted out in time. That's a good story. And then one last one. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
The first one, what are the steps for designing the stage? Do you first focus on brainstorming, then on the lights, then on the music, on the costumes, and the movements of the people?
Yes.
And my second question, in opera, you have have like a casting to choose the dancers?
Yes, yes. Good, that's a very good point. So, yes, definitely brainstorming is it. This was a fun opera, by the way. This is the Love of Three Oranges, where all the oranges basically opened up and there was a princess inside. Okay. And they were like giant Fabergé eggs. Do you know who Fabergé was? He was a jeweler and he created these things. So it was like a Russian story. Anyway, yeah. So yes, brainstorming, that is like really important. But brainstorming is like something that happens like as a sorry, you asked the question. Sorry, something else. I got confused for a second. Yeah. So brainstorming happens at every level. So you do brainstorming and then you come up with a basic idea. And then you do some more brainstorming, and then that idea gets developed. Okay, so it's like it's a sort of a slow process. Usually, we start with a set first because that is the biggest aspect to deal with. Okay, and then the costume happens, and then lights and all that sort of thing comes in much later, like when you're actually working on the stage. Okay, so that's like the last part of the process. Lights and makeup, of course, that's also very important. And yeah, and then in answer to your second question was
In an opera, do you have like casting to choose the
yes, casting. Yes, so it depends on the theatre. So I'm freelance. I go to different theatres, and they ask me to bring to life a particular opera, which is an opera which was written sometimes hundreds of years ago, and I just have to do that. And so sometimes the theatre lets me do the casting, or they say, this is our short list, who do you like? And then I say, well, I've got in my mind this idea that the hero should be like kind of really small and very kind of nervous and totally unheroic, and then they say, oh, well, we've got the singer who fits that exactly, But then sometimes I will get asked to work in the theatre, and they've already done all the casting, and then you just have to accept what you've got, okay, and work with it. And that's another thing, as I was saying earlier, about flexibility. It's so important just to be flexible and to find ways to work with, collaborate and to collaborate.
And with that, I'd like to very, very, very much thank Mr. Alessandro Talevi because he was sick yesterday and this morning. He's not even had lunch, but he has not wanted to skip his commitment to you. So please join me in giving him a big, big applause. Thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've really enjoyed your questions and your thought-provoking comments and things. So it's been a really pleasure for me, and I see, in a sense, I see myself in all of you in some way, and I wish you all the best for your continuing development as artists, because you're all artists.